February 14th, she gave us her debut album, which was titled Whitney Houston. All right, we got songs like Saving All My Love, For You, and we got How Will I Know? And what happened, we also got, before I go a little further, is we got Miss Angie Stone. All right, and you know Angie Stone was amazing, a solo artist in the late 1990s. And we received her by Clive Davis. She released an album called Black Diamond, and yeah, all was well. And I don't know if many of you guys remember, but Milli Vanilli was actually signed by Clive Davis, all right? And that's in 1989. So literally, Arista Records was a great time. Like I said, we were getting great hits from Whitney. We were hearing from Angie. We were seeing Milli Vanilli. So a lot was going on. And what happened as well is when Clive decided to leave his records, Arista Records, all right, because he wanted to go and found basically a new label, which would be J Records, Whitney chose to stay at Arista, and she signed an exclusive multi-album contract valued at more than $100 million. So you see, that was one of the biggest deals at that time, all right? It was the biggest deal that we had ever seen. And that happened in 2001. But what happened is Sony bought out BMG in 2008, all right? And they fully owned, all right, Arista. So we could see that Sony ended up acquiring Arista. And so in 2011, Sony disbanded the RCA Music Group and folded Arista into RCA Records. So Arista actually was like mixed in to RCA Records, all right? And in 2018, SME, Sony, revived Arista as a standalone label. So everything had changed, all right? Then in 2000, that is when Clive Davis decided to create his new label, J Records. So this was a joint venture, all right, with BMG. Then BMG bought Clive out, and Sony acquired BMG's music division, and they had total control of the label, which was folded into RCA Records in 2011. So do you see? Now, J Records was folded into RCA Records, all right? So at this time, when J Records was an active label, all right, and when Clive Davis was at the top, all right, we basically got a lot of legendary R&B, pop, and hip hop acts like Alicia Keys, like Luther Vandross, like Maroon 5, like Rod Stewart, all right? Do You Think I'm Sexy? That was a huge hit. We got Busta Rhymes. We got Jennifer Hudson, all right? We got Jamie Foxx. We had Monica at the time where she came out with You Should Have Known Better, all right? We got even Cassidy the rapper. So there was so much going on. And at the same time, Brandy was then signed to RCA Records in 2011, all right, to 2012. She was only there for a year. But during her time there, she did release her sixth album titled 211, all right? And so that was really interesting, and that's where we got Wildest Dreams. I don't know if you remember, but that song was a good song, and Put It Down, all right? And so, you know, things are just so interesting sometimes, but if we don't think about how things are created, then sometimes we don't know how we got to where we are. So we're just doing a little bit of, deep diving into the past, and it's going to take us to the future. So we need to talk about how Clive signed Aretha Franklin. All right. I know you remember that. All right. There was a time when Clive signed Aretha Franklin to Arista Records in 1980. All right. And she re signed again with Clive Davis to Arista Records in 2012 because she needed to release one of her albums, and it was going to be like an album where she was coming back out. All right. So that's what happened. She re signed in 2012. So she was signed years ago with Columbia Records in 1960 to 1966, but she was signed by John Hammond. All right. And at that time, he had her leading, with jazz and more pop. All right. And then in 1966 to 1979, Aretha Franklin was with Atlantic, and she was giving us gospel vibes. That's where we got RESPECT. Find out what it means to me. RESPECT. You know the rest, okay? Then, when 2011 hit to 2018, we received. That's when she was doing her own thing, Aretha Records, all right? But when she was with Arista during her time with Clive, that's where we got Freeway of Love. So we were getting a lot of R&B hits from Miss Aretha, all right? Things were changing. But what I would love for us to be aware of is that, man, there's just so much here, all right? Let's take our time and let's dive into this. Basically, I was doing research, all right? And I was thinking about just how long he's been reigning over the music industry, all right? I told you that he got his first position, okay, as president of Columbia Records at the age of 35, all right? He just passed, so that's 59 years that Clive Davis has been at the top. They even gave him a name, like the man with the golden ears, because they said that he had a way of finding talent, all right? I want us to pay attention and to know that a lot of times, let's see how I can put this. A lot of times, your favorite artists were signed by a lot of these huge music executives, all right? But they were housed at a smaller label, all right? So for example, let's talk about Bad Boy Records, all right? So Bad Boy Records, all right, is founded by who? Thank you. Yes, by Sean Combs, all right, also known as Sean Puffy Combs. And because Bad Boy Records belonged to him, he needed somebody to back him up financially. And who was that person? That person was none other than Clive Davis. So they had a 50-50 venture, all right? And with that 50-50 venture, joint venture, we had big artists, all right, that were being pushed out from P. Diddy. We had Notorious B.I.G. We had Faith Evans, all right? We had Mace and so many more, all right? So many others, all right? But also, I want us to talk about not just, this one particular joint ventures, but Clive had several. And we're not going to talk about all of them. We're just going to talk about a fraction of them. So just remember the next time you're listening to your favorite artist, who are they signed to and who is doing their distributing, all right? Because a lot of times, like I said, these joint ventures, these smaller record labels needed someone to back them up financially, and they needed help with distribution. And these are where these music executives come into play. So we had LaFace Records, all right? That was with L.A. Reid and Babyface. And they also had a joint venture with Clive Davis. So we had big artists like TLC. We had Tony Braxton. We had Outkast. We had Usher. So this was like literally all the famous stars that were being created and being pumped and being, shared with us in the globally from Atlanta. All right, specifically. Then there's another joint venture, all right, that Clive Davis had, none other than Octane Records, formed as a joint venture under J Records, which again, remember that was his own label, And Clive created that to house artists like Maroon 5. All right, so Octane Records literally housed Maroon 5. And that's where we got like, this love has taken lift off. I mean, she said, you know, we know. All right, we got songs like She Will Be Loved, you know, tap on my window, knock on my. You already know. All right, then we had another joint venture that I had to talk about, because if I didn't talk about this one, then sometimes we're not going to know where our favorite artists were created, were found. All right. We had a joint venture between Clive Davis and Dallas Austin, another big producer, all right, from Atlanta. And he founded, Austin founded in 1992 Rowdy Records, all right? And who was signed to Rowdy Records? None other than Monica. Yes, Monica was 9 years old and she sent a tape to Clive Davis, but he normally doesn't sign young talent, is what he says. So he didn't even give it another look. But here they were 3 years later when she turned 12, all right? And when she was 12, she had the opportunity to go and to audition in front of Clive Davis. And right then and there, she was signed, all right, to Rowdy Records, all right? So again, Rowdy Records was created by Dallas Austin, and I believe L.A. Reid had a hand in it, but it was mostly Dallas Austin's label. And then what happened is Clive Davis was backing it up, all right? He was the joint venture. So interesting, all right? But I need for us to be aware of that. And then they basically had a huge success with Monica, because just at the age of, the tender age, I gotta say, of 14, we got her album, all right? And I believe it was titled Miss Thang, all right? Miss Thang. So it was a huge album, all right? And that album did great numbers. It brought them much success. And so Clive was able to fund Rowdy Records and also distribute, all right, her album, Monica's album, through his own Arista Records. All right. So it's so interesting, but sometimes we just don't know if we don't talk about these things. So not only did Clive help to push out and form and shape the new way that we would see R&B with all of the music that was being pumped out from L.A. Reid, or with L.A. Reid, I should say, and Babyface, but we also were receiving a new form of hip hop from Bad Boy Records. So do you see how he has had a foot, I would say, on the industry, and not just him, but like I said, many others, like Berry Gordy, okay, many others. It's just that a lot of the others, you know, like David Geffen, some of them are still kicking, and some, like Clarence Avant, you know, he's no longer here, but some of them are still kicking, all right? So we have Clive Davis, and he was kicking for so long, and he's literally shaped music for such a long time, almost 6 decades. Can you imagine? That's like my life, your grandparents' life, and maybe even your great grandparents' life. 60 years, all right? 59 years, just 1 year shy of 60 years. That's a very long time, all right? So I want us to be aware that Clive Davis is a music executive, a producer, and a president of Columbia Records at one point, Arista Records and J Records, but he cannot sing, okay? He doesn't write, okay? He started his life, he started out in the music industry, let me make sure I say that clearly, as a lawyer from Harvard. Okay, so just start to think, what's going on here, all right? What's going on here? And I want to say that because I'd like to talk a little bit about Donny Hathaway. All right, Donny Hathaway was not, you know, on this sector of the music label world, but Donny Hathaway was actually with ATCO, all right, or ATCO, and they were a part of Atlantic Records. But over there, Donny Hathaway is what you would call a prodigy, all right? He was singing, playing the piano, writing his own music, producing his own music, okay? And he even worked with Aretha, all right? So you would think, why is it that somebody who is a prodigy like a Donny Hathaway, why is it that he needs to be signed by these music executives? Why is it that Donny Hathaway isn't doing the signing? Okay, let that sink in and let that sit there, because it's time for us to close those doors to the demonic realm. Many of your favorite artists, guys, have had to have that internal battle, and it's been a conflict of, do I make this music and stay here knowing that I'm making music that I don't really want to make, but I've already signed a contract, and because I've signed a contract, I have to continue to make this. So you have to think, who are these music execs? Well, these music execs are the ones who are telling them how they ought to look, what type of music they're going to sing about, what are the topics that they're going to talk about, all right? What are the genres that they're going to create or shape? Because when Maroon 5 came on the scene, through Clive Davis, we were given pop rock, all right? We never really had that anymore, like before. It was kind of like pop rockish and R&B all at the same time. So yes, these music execs are the ones that's telling them how to dress, all right? What to sing about, all right? Even how to sing. And when I say how to sing, let's take a break now and let's bring it on back down. And we're going to talk about Toni Braxton. So many of you guys would say, Toni Braxton, where does she fit into any of this? Well, you see, Toni Braxton was signed, all right, to where? I hope you were listening. I hope you were listening. Okay, she was with LaFace Records, all right? And so when she was with LaFace Records with L.A. Reid and Babyface, they, all right, were the ones who would tell her, you know, what songs to sing. And I don't know if you've ever watched any of her like movies, or if you've read any of her autobiographies, but she does talk about how she got tired at one point, that she was like, man, I don't want to keep singing about heartbreak. Like, I don't want to be that one, you know? I don't want it to be that when people hear my songs, they're like, oh, it's another heartbreak song, you know? But it's like she didn't have a say, because they don't have a say. Like I said, when they sign these contracts, they are given a persona. And that persona, they need to take it on. And at any time they're told to change their persona, they have to change it. So I want us to be aware, again, who was backing LaFace Records? Clive Davis, all right? So there was a time where they brought to Toni Braxton a new song. It was called Unbreak My Heart, all right? As you know, one of a super popular song, all right? Unbreak My Heart. It did huge numbers on the charts. Well, they brought the songwriter who brought the song, and it was none other than Diane Warren, all right? She brought the song, the demo, all right? And she was singing it super low, like a really, really low key. And so L.A. Reid kind of told Toni Braxton, you know, you got to do that as well. Okay, you better sing real low. And he said that it was alluring, all right, and it was going to be sultry, and that's what they needed in order to bring, all right, the sadness that song needed, or that it required. So can you imagine, like, you now having to lower your voice and sing in a low register where that's possibly not your tone, but you have been provided or given a song that has been written for you, or it's been written, because sometimes too, these songwriters don't even write the song for someone in particular. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. And then they're just going to shop it, all right, with different labels. And whichever label, all right, or music executive is like, hey, I like it, we're going to take it. Then they take it. And then, hey, they're like, I believe that this song is going to be great for Toni Braxton. We're going to give it to her. I believe this is going to be great for Lady Gaga. Like, they don't really get a say. They're just given these songs and they have to take it. And then, yes, sometimes the celebrities do have a say, and these artists can say, I'd like to get that song. All right. And even that, sometimes they'll say they want it, and that doesn't mean they'll get it. So listen, it's, you know, it's like a dog world, I would say, in the industry. All right. So Toni Braxton lowers her voice. She sings the song, and that's how we received that song, Unbreak My Heart. But Toni Braxton actually disliked that song at first when she heard it, and she felt like, oh my gosh, it's another heartbreak track, another heartbreak track. But again, the label executives knew that this was going to be needed for her to cross over, all right, because they wanted her to get over to the pop. And this song did that for her, all right. That's what this song did for Toni Braxton. And so when they were able to, tell her, like, hey, let's do it, and they convinced her, she recorded the song, and that's how we received the song. But it's so crazy because for me as a child, I'm a singer, okay? That's why my name is Do Re Mi Lo. And as a child, I was always like, I don't know, I would sing the song and I'd be like, man, this is extremely low. And so I'd have to get low, 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 low. And I'd be like, this is almost like unnaturally low. But do you see? So can you imagine, again, sometimes, you're clapping on the other end for your artist, but you don't even know what's going on behind the closed doors. You don't even know if that's a song that they want to sing, but they don't have a choice and they have to get up there and they got to sing it. All right. So also, I just want to talk briefly about Miss Diane Warren. She basically wrote a lot of big songs and she's one of Clive Davis's close friends, all right? So just be aware that there's a couple of songs that we've heard, like from Celine Dion and other artists, where she has wrote those songs, all right? But let's hop right back into, let's get back onto where we, back on track. So let's talk about how Clive Davis signed Toni Braxton first, all right, years ago, and her sisters as the vocal group, the Braxtons, all right? So they were signed first by Clive, all right? Toni and her sisters were signed by Clive in 1989, all right, to Arista Records. So it's so crazy how years later, L.A. Reid and Babyface would create a label, and then, here it is again. So what happened is actually Clive, all right, he kind of was like pointing her into that direction, like, hey, you're going to want to go there. And so that's where Toni went, Toni Braxton, and that's where she made her home. And she was signed as the first female artist to join LaFace Records, just so you know. All right, so that's really pivotal. And that was in 1991. And again, LaFace Records had a joint venture with, you got it, with Arista. All right, so they were backing them financially. All right, and they were their distributor. All right, because you do need someone to help you distribute your music. All right, and that's when we got songs like 7 Whole Days. We love that. And then we also got You Mean the World to Me. All right, so it's so interesting to me. I don't know about you, but I feel like a lot of the songs got better when they got to when they got to the joint ventures, when they got to these other labels. That's just me, but you can do your own research, okay? Because even Busta Rhymes, when he was signed to, I believe that was J Records, let me just double check. Yes, when Busta Rhymes was signed to J Records, that's when we got like Past the Cavassier. And to me, I didn't think that was like a really good song. And if you actually go back to it now and look up the lyrics, those lyrics are raunchy. Like, those lyrics are wild. I can't believe as a child I was like, like, I didn't even sing it because I just didn't think it was a good song. But I would just like watch it, like, I'm watching the music video and I'm kind of dancing, like. But it's crazy because you don't know what you're absorbing. And that's why these videos are so important. I want you to understand that there's a lot of things that you've done in your life and you were unaware that what you saw and what you heard and what came out of your mouth, all right, actually shaped you as a person. And so this is why it's imperative to pay attention to who are the music executives that are setting the tone for the musics based on the time that we're in. All right, so like I said, 59 years, all right, Clive Davis had reigned, and all these other executives that are still alive and still well and still pushing out music. All right, so this is why I'm telling you guys, I do not listen to music anymore. Years ago, I had no knowledge of what music really was, but that's why we're gonna go deep today. So I'm happy that you guys are with me, and let's keep going. All right, so we're gonna talk about how Clive separated, all right, his personal life from his second wife. So he separated from Janet Adelberg, sorry guys, Janet Adelberg in 1985 after 20 years of marriage. So that's a long time, and that's his second wife, all right? He came out as a bisexual after that. So you have to think, bisexual man, like, what else was going on in his life that we had no knowledge of? And remember, I don't mean all of us, I just mean us, like us, the people that are in the world where we are not in those tiny spaces. And that's why they say, like, Hollywood is so small. It is small because they need to keep their business and their information to themselves, all right? And so we have to think too why half of these artists are no longer even here with us. Whoa. Okay, they're not here. A lot of them are not here. So he had a 13-year relationship and a long-term monogamous relationship with his partner, Greg, all right, for over 20 years. So just now when he recently passed, he was still with Greg, all right, until he passed. So we have to know that also Clive had 4 children, all right, and his youngest one, Doug, I'm only going to talk about Doug, all right, Doug Davis is a Grammy Award winning record producer. So we'll see, what the future holds with his lineage, okay? Because we have to be aware that they're always going to want to pass that torch on to the next generation. But be aware, because this is why I said it's so important for me to come up with this video, and God be praised, we haven't had a closing the doors to the demonic realm in a minute, but God is perfect. This is the right time. Why? Because it's been 59 years. So it's time now to see what's going to happen. We're going to start to see, is music going to take a turn for the better, or is it going to continue to go down? Because like I said, the music that I hear now, I don't listen to any music, but randomly, if I'm in a store shopping, like a Marshall's, a TJ Maxx, or the mall, I'll hear a song and I'm like, what is that? Like, that sounds nuts. The music now to me just seems like it's getting worse and worse. All right. So if I thought Busta Rhymes, the Cavassier song, was terrible, listen, I don't want to know what they're doing now. All right. So I want us, all right, to now venture into what's going to bring this video all together for us, all right? Because there was just so much here that I had to unpack, but God is so faithful that he's bringing all this information to us, all right? So earlier today, I was reading the book of Daniel, all right? And when I was reading the book of Daniel, I was reading the portion where Nebuchadnezzar wanted to know what his dream meant. All right, he had a dream, he was disturbed. He said, oh my gosh, I'm going to kill all these magicians because they can't help me. And so who would be the person to provide him with the information that he needed to reveal a secret to him, to interpret his dream? None other than God's own child, Daniel. All right, so as Daniel interprets the dream to Nebuchadnezzar, what's interesting is after that, Nebuchadnezzar gives Daniel a really high position, all right, in the land. And then Daniel's like, hey, my friends too, all right? So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego also gets, they also get high positions in the land. Well, Nebuchadnezzar decides to erect a tall golden image. And then he tells everybody, hey, and let me make sure I read it word for word. He tells everybody, hey, when you hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. And whoso falls not down and worships shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. All right, so it says, if you want to read it, Daniel chapter 3, verse 7. Therefore, at that time when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. So what what's going on with this music? I'm telling you guys that they want our worship. All right. I was telling you guys in our videos about 2 weeks ago, the big showdown between God and who? 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 Okay, like the rain god, they call him. All right, so it's really important, all right, for us to understand that music is more than what you think. Music is big. Music is extremely big. All right, and we have to be careful with who we are giving our worship to. All right, because you get to decide who will receive your worship. All right, they cannot take it from you, but you get to give them your worship. All right, so the showdown was between God and it was between Baal. And Elijah said, when you guys get up there on that mountain and you see the true God, you see who he is, then if God be God, then you serve him. But if Baal be God, then serve him. And God that day showed that he is God of all, God of fire, God of water, God of everything. So also, it's interesting that Clive would sign a band years ago called Earth, Wind, and Fire. As a child, I thought their music was, I want to say, magical. Okay, we have to start we have to realize that music is spiritual. All right, it is not a physical thing, it is a spiritual thing. And so it makes me wonder, how is music captured? How is voice captured? All right, how are we being able to hear, all right, the music being played back? So we're going to get into that right now because I thought of that while I was doing my research. And